This is the second of two tutorials on routing tracks. The first routed tracks via outputs. This one will route tracks via sends. To follow along, go get this multi-track session 1207 routing sends inside the working files multi-track sessions down there at the bottom. There we go. This multi-track session is exactly the same as the one we used in the previous tutorial, so I won't show you the output side of things, but I do want to show you the sends side of things. Back on the output side of things, we were looking in this header. We had the outputs button or the input-output button selected, and we could see all the inputs and outputs here. But now we want to see the sends. And to see the sends, we click on this button. It has two little arrows on it, which represent how sends work. Sends essentially duplicate audio and split it. They split it such that one duplicate, continues on its way along the output, and the other duplicate continues along a send to another bus, and that really is how sends work. So I'm going to scroll down now looking to see where the sends are applied. You can see where they're applied by looking here where it says S1. Right now it's S1 none, so that's no send there. No send there. I'm going to scroll down a little bit down to the drums, and here we have an S1 drums compression. So the send 1 is being sent to the drums compression bus, which is just down a little bit farther here, right to that bus. And you notice that send 1 for that track and send 1 for this track both go to the drums compression bus. Well, there are multiple sends per track. You can have up to 16 sends per track. So if I scroll down a little bit farther, you'll see that there's also another send called send 2 going to the drums reverb bus right down here. In the meantime, so we have these two sends per track, both cases the same sends there per track. We also have an output from these tracks. If I click on the output side, there's always going to be output. And these outputs go to the drums mix bus. So you have the outputs going to the bus and then two sends going to two other buses. So let me give you a graphic representation of how sends work. Here's kind of a simple look at sends. We have this vocalist with her output with that track and this guitar with that track. And the line represents the output. The output continues from here smoothly to the master track, and here the output continues smoothly to the master track. But along the way, a send has been stuck in on both of those tracks such that it splits the audio. It duplicates it and splits it and sends it off to this bus. So both of these tracks have been sent to the same bus. And that bus might have an effect on it, or that bus might go to some other bus or whatever. But in this case, that bus continues on its way down to the master track. Pretty straightforward. Here it's a little more complex. Here you have the vocalist again with her output continuing all the way down to the master track. But there are two sends along the way. Again, they're splitting the audio, duplicating it and splitting it. Here they split it off so that this send goes to bus A and this send goes to bus B. In the meantime, bus A goes down to the master track and bus B makes its way to the master track as well. Then the guitar also has sends on it as well. Here's the output. It continues all the way down to the master track, but along the way it's split off and it's sent over to bus A and sent over to bus B where you might apply effects, and then these two guys make their way to the master track. They don't have to go to the master track. In fact, many times when you use sends, you have the sends go to some piece of hardware off the computer, such that you might have a headset that you're listening to and you don't really want to send this audio right here to the master track. You want it to go someplace else so you can listen to it, or send it some hardware where you might record it or apply some kind of effects to it and then bring it back into Audition. Think of Audition as the core of an audio production studio. You can have all kinds of things attached to it, and it's just the central point that allows you to direct how all these guys behave and how all these guys work together. So back here in Audition now, I think you can get a sense of how this works. We have both of these sends, if I go back to the sends view, going to different buses. So if I want to control how these drums sound, I can go down here and let's say I want to just control the reverb for these drums. So I'm going to solo the reverb bus. When I do that, it just solos those two tracks. All the rest of the tracks are muted. And I can hear how the reverb works. But I'm also going to hear how the reverb works against the two other buses here, because they will play too, because those drums are going through them as well. So I can turn them on or off. I can mute them or leave them on and see how the whole drum mix works together. If I want to mute the compression side, I can do that. If I want to mute the mix I've got basically to control volume and to control placement in the panning placement. So I want to just focus on reverb. I can just have that be solid and mute these guys. And now I can go over to the effects side, open up reverb here. and play it some more. And I can adjust the reverb, make it wetter, drier. Change the size of the room, make it not so big perhaps. Whatever. But once I decide how the reverb will work, I can do that separately from any other effect. I can work on it right here. And on top of that, I can control the volume of the reverb effect here within this bus. So it essentially applies more or less of the reverb. And now I'll unmute these guys so you can hear all three drum buses together. You can control them individually here. Take the compressor down, bring it back up. Stuff like that. So you can control each of those effects now individually here within the respective bus. Let me show you how to add another track to these two buses. I'm going to bring in a new clip, and you need to do this with me if you want to follow along. Double click here to open up the import file dialog box. Go to Working Files, Music. Just couldn't be that way. And go get the snare drum right there. Just double click on it or click and click open. There you go. Here comes the snare drum. It's alphabetical, so you got to bring it down here. I want to add the snare drum to this multi-track session. There are multiple ways to add stuff to a session. Let me just unsole this guy and scroll up a little bit. I'd like to put the snare drum up here with the rest of the drums. I could just right click here and say, bring me in a new track, add a stereo audio track. I'll skip that for now. I could go Alt A or Option A on a Mac, Alt A on Windows, or I can take that snare and drag it right to this bus track. You can't put a clip on a bus track that automatically creates a new track below the bus track. So that's a quick way to do it. I'll name this one snare so you can keep track of it. There we go. And now I want to send this to the two buses. So I open up the send side here, and I can see my send one is none. If I click this disclosure triangle, I can see now, okay, I can pick the one that I want to send it to. I want to go to the drums compression. Is that the one on top? Yeah, drums compression. Let me get that again. And then I want to have send to go to drums reverb. Now, how do I get the send to? You'd think you could see the send to here, but you can't. You got to go to this little scroll bar there and click that little arrow there, and now you go to send to. So I can add send to over here as well. We'll call this one drums reverb. I've sent it to drums reverb and drums compression, but you know, nothing is going to happen. You won't hear it there because there are more things you need to do when you work with the send, and you can't see them here unless you open this up a bit, and suddenly you're going to see more controls. Here you're going to see this thing called the pre and post fader control. You can see the volume level and a stereo balance, the panning. Now, if you don't see the stereo balance, it's because your header is shoved over to the left there like that. So just be aware that these guys can disappear depending on how wide the header is. So now you can see it. And if you go down one more notch to the next send, the panner, the balance won't show up. It won't show up until you've actually applied a send to this little send area here. So let me go up one notch or two notches. First order of business is actually to bring the volume up from negative infinity, which is silent. You need to bring it up by dragging this little guy here. We'll bring it up to about 0. That's kind of the default position, the original volume of the audio. And I'll keep the pan where it is. I don't want to start panning here. If I'm going to pan it anywhere, I'll pan it as a group. And then finally, this pre and post fader thing. This is kind of confusing. The default is post fader. You can tell it's post fader because the little arrow is right of this little bar here. Pre fader, the arrow is to the left of that little bar. What post fader does is it takes any kind of track volume change that you made here, and that will show up in the bus, in the send bus. And that is what you'd expect to have happen. If you have pre-fade on, that means that no matter what you do to the track volume, not the clip volume, but the track volume, which is accessible down here, no matter what you do to the track volume, the full volume of the clip will come through. Whatever your clip volume is set to, it will come through in the bus. And so while you're working hard to have the track volume be down in some place, down on the bus, if you have pre-fader set on, you're going to hear that track volume. The advantage of having a pre-fader set like this instead of post-fader is that at the end of the clip, let's say you're doing a reverb, and you want the reverb to continue playing for a little while. If you take it pre-fade, this will fade out here. Let's say that'll drop down. The audio will still play at full volume down in the bus, and there you can let the reverb sort of slowly fade away by changing the volume level within the bus track. It's kind of complicated, but I think you can get a sense of using the pre and post fader as a way to let the reverb continue to kind of fade off into the distance rather than cut off quickly by dropping the volume of the track here. So I'll go back to the post fader, which is the default setting, and I'll just get rid of these little keyframes by dragging them off the top and off the bottom, and we'll get this guy back to the default setting. And you can do this on each send. Each send has its own set of controls. So the pre and post fade thing applies to each different send. So if I go to the second send, for example, I could have this be pre-fade and the first send can be post-fade, whatever. And I can control these fellas down inside their buses. Let me show you one other thing I want to do. I want to show you how you can take a send and have it go not eventually to the master track, but to have it actually go to another piece of hardware, typically a headset. So I'm going to have the rhythm guitar and the organs go off to a headset bus that the vocalist can listen to when he or she is recording a new vocal. So I'm going to go to rhythm guitar, go to the send. I want to make a new bus for that, call it headset. So I'll go to stereo. I'm going to call this bus headset. Okay, and so that rhythm guitar will go to headset. And I want to send the organ left and right to that bus as well. Now, it doesn't make any sense for me to do them individually since these guys, the output for these guys, is going to the organ bus. Let me go down to the organ bus. You see how this can get a little complicated, but here's the organ bus. The organ bus can have sends too. Now, the output for the organ bus is to go to the master track, which is fine. But I also can have a send for the organ bus go off to the headsets. I go back to here and have the send one for the organ bus go off to the headsets. And that means that the vocalist can hear just the organ and just the guitar and nothing else, and the master track won't be affected by this. So you can see that you can use a send on a bus as well. So yeah, I realize it can get a little complicated with all these sends and all these outputs. But as you ramp up your audio production skills and bring in more hardware, you're going to come to rely on this versatility and customizability of all the sends and the outputs inside Audition.